Welcome, everyone. It is time for another review. Now, this one's a little bit different. People have been saying, hey, Steve, why are you always bashing on the atheist? Why are you always reviewing their stuff and you don't review any theist stuff? Which, by the way, I have before a couple times. But I'm going to review this one, not because somebody sent it to me, because they didn't. It is something that I ran across, and I went, oh. It is fairly old, unfortunately. This goes back to, well, I don't know, July 15, 2020. So it's about, over a year. But it's, the things that this guy talks about are still current. I mean, obviously, we talk about this stuff all the time. So I was like, yeah, I think I kind of want to do a review on this. And it's not very long. It's only 10 minutes. Perfect, right? 10 to 20-minute videos. Those are great. If you want to send me 10 to 20-minute videos to review, I can do that. I like to keep these down to an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours at most if there's a lot to talk about. But I really can't do the 3 or 4 hour streams any longer. I don't have it in me. And it's just not worth it. People don't watch 4 hour streams. Anyways, let me give you a little background. This guy's name is Deflate, I guess. I know nothing about him, so there's not much background to really tell you. Let me know if you guys can actually hear me real quick. I'm sure that it is streaming properly, as usual, and when I start playing, that you can hear him as well. But basically, his argument goes like this, in a nutshell, then we'll get into the video. Did you know that evil disproves atheism? No, I did not know this. Matter of fact, this is news to me. I was not aware of this. I've read a little bit about moral theory, not an expert in it by any stretch of imagination, but I happen to like the topic of theory. And for those who may be following me blog, I actually wrote a little moral terminological cheat sheet that people can use. I do not know if I'm going to go over that in this video. I may or may not, depending on how long this takes, depending on how much interaction there is with the live chat. I do have it ready to go. It is on my blog, and maybe I might go through it so you guys can, help me out if I didn't exactly explain the position properly or if there's an error in it. I like to correct things, but I did put the link in the video description, so if you want to go check out my moral terminological cheat sheet, you're more than welcome to. But like I said, I may or may not get to that. But we are going to just start off by evaluating this guy's argument about knowing that evil disproves atheism. And my answer to that question is no. I mean, he asked, the title is a question, right? It's an interrogatory. It is, did you know that evil disproves atheism? I was not aware of this. Matter of fact, by the way, to a fun fact, this question only makes sense if atheism is propositional, right? So any atheist that's arguing against this that isn't holding atheism propositional, why are you bothering, right? Because he's not asking, does evil disprove that you have a psychological or non-psychological position? And what he's saying is, for some reason, that he thinks evil disproves the position of God not existing, right? So. But let's get into his argument and see what you guys think, because it's not that good. So let me know if you guys can hear him.
Oftentimes, you'll hear atheists claim that if God existed, there would certainly be no evil such as massacres, wars, child abuse, cancer, and what have you. Now, the problem of evil is a serious and complex one, and I will certainly not be able to cover all its aspects in one single video.
All right, just for a point of clarification, there's actually more than one problem of evil. There's the logical problem of evil, and there's the evidential problem of evil. And I've gone over these on my channel. I don't know, like a 3-hour stream on the logical problem of evil. And it is very complicated. It's complex. You start getting into, theodicies and Plantinga's versions of theodicies and Hicks' soul building exercises and all this other nonsense that I don't think really defeats any of the potential problem evils. But in a nutshell, the logical problem evil is just basically saying along the lines of, look, if you have an omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing being that has the power to get rid of evil, has the ability, and have the know-how to do it, and has the want to because he's omnibenevolent, he should therefore eradicate evil. There shouldn't be evil in the world if there's an omnipotent being that's all good, all powerful, and all knowing that has the ability to get rid of evil. So the argument is basically that if you have all these propositions, all these premises, that the system is logically incoherent, that you cannot have all these premises be true at once, given the premises that you have an omni-God that has certain properties that were dealt with later on. Matter of fact, the theists dealt with that later on, and they kind of changed the way they argued for a God long time ago. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was called the principle of eternal verities, that they decided God can only do what is logical because God can't make himself disappear. And so, there's certain things that they came up with to say, okay, God allows this for that. And so the omni God, that the original type of God that people were saying, oh, this God is all powerful, all knowing, and all good. Why would he allow evil? If you're all good, why would you allow evil? And the argument that, oh, you can't have good without evil doesn't really work for me. You can have the concept of evil, right? The concept of evil can exist to still have good, I think. And, we'll get into some more complexities of what is the good and stuff like that. But just for simplicity's sake, you don't physically have to have something else. You can have a concept, right? And so God could say, look, this is what evil is like. I don't want you experiencing that. I don't want you to have harm. And parents, we understand that, right? Look, as for having children, we never want them to experience harm, right? Now, we know it's part of the learning process. We know that they have to fall down and get back up, and we understand that. And there's a sort of minimal amount of evil that they have to experience, and that's called gratuitous or natural evil, right? Falling down, scraping your knee, stubbing your toe. These are called natural evils. It doesn't mean there's some kind of metaphysical agency behind it. It just means that it's not good to hurt yourself, right? It sucks, Now, I'm not trying to relate it to, pleasure and pain, and then you start getting the what's called the naturalistic fallacy. But we do understand that evil is a part of life, and I get that. But that goes into the evidential problem of evil, right? Why is there so much evil in the world? Would it make a difference if I hurt myself one less time? Did I learn anything different by hurting myself 50 times rather than 49 times, right? So that there's a distinction to be made there. Yeah, this is why. Yeah, 20 seconds in, I'm already going 5 minutes. Yeah, well, this is why these things take a while, right?
But the one thing you will learn in this video is why it is the height of inconsistency for an atheist to even talk about the problem of evil. That's because, on the assumption of atheism, the notion that there is a dichotomy between good and evil is as delusional as the notion that green unicorns and pink dragons race against each other.
That is so wildly weird, the way you described that. First of all, it's not delusional. Delusion is when you have a malfunctioning of the mind, where your mind is telling you something that's not vertically correct comparative to reality, right? So in the theory of mind, you have different things like what's called verticality, meaning that what you're seeing is what you actually happening. There's an illusion, which means your mind's just playing tricks on you, but you're aware of this, right? And there's actually, delusions, hallucination. Hallucinogens are things that your mind is perceiving that's not really there. Those are delusions, right? And so just because you have a mistake, just because you have something that isn't true, does not necessarily mean it's delusional. This is why when people say, well, theists are delusional for believing in God, no, that's hyperbolic and it's completely wrong. I know a lot of Facebook groups even say, if you start arguing like that, you're going to be removed, because it is a very stupid way to argue. I mean, just because you have a false belief doesn't mean you're delusional. I was a theist one time. I was never delusional, right? I never had my mind playing tricks on me and making me see and hear things that weren't really there, except in lucid states. Obviously, that happened many times, or when I'm extremely tired. I'll give you that, right? But I never deluded myself to saying, oh, look, I'm sitting down and having lunch with Jesus. That never happened. So there's a distinction to be made there. And plus, again, atheism and morality, there's a complete distinction to be made there, right? I mean, he's making the argument that atheists shouldn't even be talking about good and evil because of them, these concepts don't exist. Why not? What does moral theory have to do with God? There are some moral theories that do deal with God, like divine command theory, which is, to me, a form of ethical subjectivism. But you don't need that. There are many other moral theories that atheists use to determine a sense of morality, right? I mean, you don't have to have, and most of them do recognize, even theists, this is what is strange about this guy, most theists that I've talked to will recognize, look, the atheist doesn't have to recognize there's a God. Now, we do believe, not me, but they're saying, we believe that, there has to be a God to have morality, and the atheist is just in that world that exists with God. He doesn't have to recognize it. So an atheist can be good without recognizing God. And some will some will actually say, well, yeah, you don't need God, but very few, but you don't need God, but you can still have other moral theories. And me, I'm, of course, a non-believer, so I'm like, yeah, of course you could be good whether God exists or not. There's nothing that necessitates a God to be good. It just boggles my mind that there are theists out there that argue that. But he's going to argue it so poorly it's ridiculous. So around
planet Earth. This is Lucas from Deflate,
Hi,
countering
Lucas.
the skeptics' objections to Christianity. If you're new here,
And by the way, now he's moving to skeptics. Completely different topic.
click that subscribe button to get our upcoming videos. So
Don't forget
let's
to
start with
subscribe
a
to this
couple of
channel.
basics. On atheism, we are just one among the many thousands of species which evolved from that one common ancestor cell which crawled out of the prebiotic soup.
Okay, can you see how bad this already starts? I mean, he fundamentally screws up basic biology here. And first of all, there's millions and millions of species just in the eukaryotes alone. I think there's something like 8 million, give or take, plant and animal species, if I'm not mistaken, but give or take, and billions of other species probably when you factor in bacteria and things of that nature. But the cell did not crawl out of any prebiotic soup, and it wasn't one cell. Luca, which is the last known common ancestor, is not one cell; it's a population, and so we have evolved from a population of eukaryotes that before that were pre-eukaryotic. But it wasn't bacteria. We never came from bacteria. Bacteria is a completely different domain. Excuse me, a different kingdom. It's a completely different kingdom than we are. So, I mean, he's already like just strawmanning the hell out of evolutionary biology. And atheists don't have to believe that. That's not contingent upon believing there's no God. I mean, it just happens to be that it explains our phylogenetic history. It explains how we evolved and how we exist and biodiversification. So the theory of evolution, the modern evolutionary synthesis combined with common descent, explains our observations. It happens to be congruent with observations. It makes no difference to evolutionary theory whether God exists or not. It is not contingent upon a God existing. If somebody wants to believe God existed and he set up the whole plan for all this and he made evolutionary biology happen, okay, fine. And you're in the category more like Sigart, right? Who has a PhD in biochemistry and he's able to reconcile that. Or you're in the atheist position where there are no gods and evolution just happened because of chemical reactions and specifically materialistic type things, and that's fine. Either one has a position on that, but both of them agree life goes back about 4 billion years, give or take, right? I think the oldest thing we've discovered is don't quote me on this, I think it's like 3.8 3.9 billion years. Stromatolites are, if I'm not mistaken, that's the oldest record, but we know that somewhere around 4 billion years ago, life somehow started to develop. Now, how it did and the abiogenesis behind it is not even relevant to evolutionary theory. Maybe one day they might integrate, but right now they're distinctly different. How life began and how life evolved are not the same theory. But he's just kind of throwing this all out there, right? So,
Some 4 billion years ago. That is, just like snails, rats, sharks, and butterflies, we fight for survival as described by Darwin's beautiful theory of evolution.
well, yes and no. I mean, the Darwin's theory, I hate to say it, and I know I'm going to get backlash for this, but people really do have to understand this. Darwin's theory is obsolete. Darwin's theory is obsolete 100 years ago. Okay? Darwin has some misconceptions. He didn't know a lot about genetics because it wasn't really around at the time. DNA was just starting to be discovered. He didn't understand that it was particulate, not blended. He didn't understand that DNA was the mechanism by which these hereditary traits were passed on from generation to generation. Now, he had a lot of good ideas. I mean, many things that he said were correct. I mean, we understand that life will reproduce, and it's a battle between survival and adaptation and natural selection, and this tooth and claw kind of thing. But Darwinism itself is not the theory of evolution. Theory of evolution is called the modern evolutionary synthesis combined with descent with modification. That is distinctly different from Darwinism. And so you hear people say, well, neo-Darwinism, like I know Jerry Coyne and a few other biologists classify themselves as neo-Darwin. I think it's Jerry Coyne, neo-Darwinist. I don't particularly like that term, and some of them don't even do that because even neo-Darwinism seems to not really encapsulate what it means by the theory of evolution, which is modern evolutionary synthesis. And it doesn't encapsulate evo-devo, and it doesn't encapsulate epigenetics. So, yeah, when people ask, do you subscribe to Darwinism, I always say no. And they say, oh, you don't believe in theory of evolution? No, of course I do. Theory of evolution it makes sense. I mean, it's probably one of the most accurate theories we've ever developed. I would say the only one that is even close is quantum mechanical theory. But I don't subscribe to Darwinism because Darwinism is defunct. And so you have to be really specific on terms, because young Earth creationists will latch onto that, right? Oh, look, they don't believe in Darwinism either. No, that's because Darwinism and evolution don't conflate them.
Now, of course, somewhere along the way, we miraculously picked up a mind, language, the capacity to create art, literature, and music, but never mind, we're just another species, more or less on par with guinea pigs, mushrooms, and chimpanzees.
Again, what a ridiculous argument. We didn't miraculously pick up these things. Again, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I took biology in college, and I read about it, and I have done videos on evolutionary biology. But the way I understand it, our minds take up a huge amount of wattage comparative to the rest of our body. And at some point in time, and it may be because we developed fire and we were able to cook meat better and whatever, but for some reason, proteins developed, things happened where our mind started to develop more. We got more synapses, we got more intelligent, we were able to use more power, and that led us to more of a consciousness, of ability to self-reflect. You know, I'm not saying that other animals don't have some kind of sentience. What I'm saying is that we are, as a sentient being, sapient, that we understand our own being, and we can do things that other species cannot. And that might just be a completely adaptive trait. You know, we can't make honey, bees can. Right? We are inept at making honey. I mean, we could artificially do it, but we cannot ourselves biologically secrete honey. You know, they can. It's an adaptive niche that they have filled over, you know, a long period of time. So our intelligence, completely as understandable, came from evolutionary history. That doesn't mean I think we're on the same par as a guinea pig. I mean, if we were, then we would be doing experiments, you know, with humans the same way we do with guinea pigs and rats. And we don't. We don't hold them as the same moral agency as we do other humans. That's how morality came about, because we are social creatures and we have to get along with each other. We don't have to get along with guinea pigs, right? But chimpanzees, bonobos, you know, they're called pan-troglodytes, chimpanzees, bonobos and orangutans and apes, other apes, we do feel a lot of empathy with them because they're very closely related to us. That we understand that they have feelings. We understand that they have emotions. They may not be able to express them like we do, but they feel pain. They feel love and compassion and wanting to protect their children just as we do, right? That doesn't mean that they have the technology or the ability to do technology that we're able to do. We are way beyond that. Now, who knows? Millions of years from now, maybe some species might develop very similar to us. They won't be human, right? This weird thing that young Earth creationists say that, oh, well, why haven't other apes developed into humans? Well, because that would be impossible. You know, if you've got a branch and it branches off two different ways, and we're over here, this branch over here can never develop anything over here. It could be similarities, right? They could be co-evolutionary traits, and they might eventually be something that maybe much looks like us, but they will not be human. But we don't know, right? We don't know what evolution will happen because we can't predict that, right? Because it changes with selective pressures and genetic drift and all these other factors that go into how things change. But do you guys agree so far that this already has so many bad arguments? I mean, we're not even, what are we, 5 minutes in? I don't know, but let me know what you guys think of the live chat, because this is so bad to begin with. And this is how you know why I wanted to review this.
That's why Rationality Rules would frequently start his video like this.
Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope that you're well.
Now,
well, we are apes. We are classified as apes. I mean, I pronounce it hominidae, but I think it's hominidae, but I don't know, whatever. The Latin prefixes, or the Latin words for these things, I always hate. But basically, the great apes. We are members of the great apes, and we're classified as that because we have evolved along the same phylogenetic lines as other great apes, right? So, for Rationality Rules, Stephen, people know his real name. He greets people like that. So, what's the problem with that? I mean, we are,
what is interesting is that atheists usually don't complain about there being a problem of evil in the animal kingdom. I mean, I have never heard anyone talking about humpback whales committing atrocities when swallowing tons of krill.
Well, because they're a different species than us. Again, morality came about because we had to get along as a species, because we realized if we start doing harm to others, others are going to do harm to us. If you steal from them, they're going to steal from you. And this whole adage of honor among thieves doesn't seem to be the case most of the time, right? So we recognize this, right? And so society as a whole developed a moral code, Hammurabi's code, and other codifications, a dialogical approach to rule of law that said, look, as a society, we have to implement certain rules to get along. And if you break those rules, if you break those social contracts, then there's going to be penalties for it. We had to do that, or there would be anarchy and society couldn't flourish, right? So, we don't care what other species do because they're not moral agents as we are. They don't have the same moral considerations that we have as our species in a society, right? So, yeah, it's a really, really bad analogy.
Nor have I ever heard an atheist being outraged at the fact that among certain kinds of apes, males unjustly commit rape and infanticide when they copulate with females by force and kill off their offspring.
Okay, by the same token, if we understand that other apes, right, not humans because we are apes, but if other apes don't understand that these things are harmful, these things are detrimental to a society, right? Even their own society, I think you make the argument is probably bad, but they're not aware of these things because they're not trying to build a society of people that have to get along. Then we can't hold them to the same standard. Just like when there's a person who is mentally unable to stand trial for their crimes, they're deemed mentally non-competent, right? We don't hold people that are mentally non-competent or incompetent to the same standards to the rest of us. Why? Because they don't have the faculties to recognize their behavior. So how is this any different from apes or other apes? I should probably find a better term. They're not competent to recognize that what they're doing is probably harmful and is causing harm to the female ape, right? Now, we as people that do recognize that, should we step in or not? That's a different argument, right? But we can't step into the wild all the time. They have to learn these things on their own just as much as we did, right? And if there's an argument we had is, hey, if things don't progress in a certain way, do we have the right to intervene? This is the prime directive in Star Trek, right? And the same principle applies. You don't have to go to a planet light years away with an entire alien civilization to kind of implement the prime directive. Should we interfere with apes' natural progression? Should we do DNA testing and change their alterations for the DNA for apes and end up with the Planet of the Apes kind of situation? Something along those lines, right? Not that it was DNA manipulation. I don't forget what even was. But yeah, I mean, there are arguments to be had for that. Why? Because again, these are ethical considerations. And why do we have ethical considerations? Because we are moral agents of ethical concern.
Why the silence? Well, when whales eat krill, they're just fighting for survival. And when male apes force themselves on females and kill their kids, well, they're just propagating their genes. That's simply the beauty of natural selection taking its wondrous course, as Darwin said. So from whales and apes back to us humans, though again, according to rationality rules and his fellow atheists, there is no real difference anyway. Now here,
I don't think that's the argument. Now, granted, I mean, I generally agree with rationality rules on a lot of his things. However, the only main criticism about rationality rules is he throws out fallacies all the time, and I don't think these fallacies are actually accurate most of the time. He just loves to throw out a fallacy and thinks that's a defeater, and it's not. Plus, he never has accurately explained the whole atheism, as just a lack of belief thing. I've had numerous conversations with rationality rules over the years. And he just seems to have a cognitive dissonance, right? I mean, he's so wanting to be rational and logical, and yet when I give him a logical argument, he just waves it away, going, I don't know, and he wants to adhere to the ACA type thing because even though he has so many problems with the ACA, he still has that mindset, and I'm not quite sure why he hasn't dissolved himself of that mindset and disassociated with himself of that, because he is a smart guy. And me and him have talked much about like Cosmic Skeptic, and Cosmic Skeptic has changed his positions over the years as well. And a lot of it was fruitful dialogue with rationality rules. And behind the scenes, I've had conversations with rationality rules about Alex O'Connor's positions. Like when he was saying he was a moral, he said like a moral realist, or sorry, a moral anti-realist at the same time trying to promote emotivism, which is incompatible with each other. You cannot be a moral cognitivist, which would be moral realism falls under moral cognitivism, and be a emotivist. Those are two diametrically non-compatible positions, and he subsequently has changed that. But again, he's arguing that rationale rules should be arguing, oh, you know, can't have, you know, good and bad. We can't even be talking about good and bad, and that's nonsense.
Here's the rub. Atheists claim that we are just another kind of animal, fighting for...
Not just another animal. We are animals, but I mean, I'm not a speciesist, but I do hold humans in a higher regard, right? Because we are able to do things that other species cannot do. Now, I understand there's some implications for that. You know, an alien race comes down and they think they're the superior one, and they start attacking us. But then again, my ethics at least hold well with that, because we are intelligent agents, and no matter how intelligent they are, they have to recognize us as being intelligent agents. Even if they don't, you know, we're not at that level, we are self-aware, and that to me is a defining factor on a lot of this.
For survival. However, when apes in the jungle kill babies and force themselves on their females, atheists are happy to put this into the magic trunk of Darwin's evolution.
But it's not Darwin evolution, and it's not putting it anywhere. Nature is nature. These things happen. What does he want us to do? Intervene on every single, you know, if a lion's attacking gazelle, we go, no, don't do that. Don't kill the poor gazelle. I mean, nature's brutal. That's why it's called tooth and claw, right? I mean, blood flows in the natural kingdom. But we recognize thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, we can't have that in our species. We start going around killing each other, the species doesn't flourish. And we recognize that. Other species have not, you know, fully recognized, you know, that you shouldn't kill their own. And, you know, even to this day, we still, you know, kill animals for food. Not to get into the whole veganism thing, but we have to survive, and we are, unfortunately, omnivores. Now, people can say, well, I have a vegan diet and I supplement. Okay, fine. But biologically, we are omnivores.
As their never questioned dogma, which supposedly explains everything. That's nature taking...
It doesn't explain everything. Modern evolutionary synthesis explains biodiversification, explains why we observe so many species and how they got here. That and how they evolved. That's what it explains. Why do I do this to myself, guys? I'm telling you, this stuff just hurts my head when I listen to this.
Its course according to the priests and popes of atheism, and Dawkins's followers are, of course, more than happy to blindly believe it. However...
Not blindly. There's evidence for evolution. Now, I don't think this guy's a young earth creationist. I don't even know. If somebody knows something about him, let me know whether he's a young earth creationist or not. I do not know. So I don't know if he accepts evolutionary theory at all. I don't know to what extent. I don't remember. I went through the video pretty quickly. After about 4 minutes in, my mind was already kind of fried. So maybe he mentioned it. I don't remember. But I don't think that he is. But I could be completely wrong on that.
When they see the same thing happening among human apes, they ditch natural selection and the fight for survival and suddenly start ranting about evil instead. Now, how does this make any sense? Are we animals or are we not?
Yes, we're animals. We're biologically animals. That doesn't mean we have the same ethical standards as other animals. I mean, this is what this guy doesn't seem to understand. Being self-aware comes with certain things, such as, if I harm you, you can harm me back. If I steal a loaf of bread from this guy, the other guy can steal a loaf of bread from me. We understand these things, that other animals are not going to have the intelligence and the brain power to conceptualize and understand and put it into practice, even how to codify these things, to have laws and have societal, even if they're not even written down. Society has unwritten laws that we understand. We all understand, even on the internet. There's unwritten laws about the internet. There's certain things you just don't do. You know, we're finding this out all over the place when we look at content creators that seem to violate, you know, the code of conduct for YouTube, even though they're not against terms of service. There are just certain things you don't go about doing, and there's a price to be paid for that. And so we do that because we are people that recognize that it's a golden rule. It's simply as that. I mean, I'll put it as the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And that's not just some kind of theological slogan. That's categorical imperative. And it is categorical imperative because it seems to apply in all instances. Is that, look, if you don't want somebody to be shitty to you, don't be shitty to them. Simple as that.
Well, welcome to the twisted logic of irrationality rules and his fellow apes. Now, to be fair,
I don't see how that's twisted logic. I just don't. I don't understand his argument here that he thinks it's twisted logic.
some atheists are at least rational enough to recognize that none of this makes any sense. And so they try to fix up the situation a little bit. They would say that though we're animals, similar to those raping apes, evolution has miraculously endowed us with a sense of what is good and evil.
Why is that miraculous? Again, this is not that complicated. I harm you, you harm me, I steal your bread, you steal mine. I mean, it doesn't take a miracle for a group of individuals to understand these types of concepts and how they work over a period of time.
As a helpful adaptation for our species to thrive and survive, even though clearly there is no such thing as good and evil, but there's only the illusion of it.
Well, why? Again, now that I think this is where it starts to get into a little bit of equivocation. The terms good or evil do not have to have some kind of solidified ontological explanation or meaning. Matter of fact, there's arguments that good cannot even be defined properly. Every way to try to define good, because of what's called Moore's open-ended question, it will lead into the naturalistic fallacy, trying to define it as pleasurable or something relating to a feeling comes into the naturalistic fallacy. And there's really no good way, and I hate to say the word good there, but there's no really proper way to define good. It's very difficult to define what good is. However, we can conceptualize what we mean by good and evil. And we ground that in what's called eudaimonia, or human flourishing most of the time. And we want humans to flourish. We want us to benefit, and we don't want to be harmed as a society. And I think that's a great way to ground it. I have no issue with that whatsoever. Wittgenstein, I think, grounds it, if I'm not mistaken, in empathy and compassion. But the principles are still the same, right? And so when we look at something and we say, hey, this is not good, we mean that this is harmful to society. And a prescriptivist would say the proposition like stealing is wrong. They, as a non-cognitivist, would say it's not saying stealing is wrong is good or true, false. It's not propositional. It's just saying don't steal. It's prescribing a directive, right? It's prescribing you to do something. And so we can have good or evil in those capacities. Good is the right thing to do, and evil is the wrong thing to do. And then we could talk about what's called natural evils, which are not based upon any teleological foundation as far as a moral or an agent. It is based upon the fact that it causes harm. Hurricanes cause harm. They are from nature. And you can make a teleonomic argument that it's by design that hurricanes will cause damage, right? I mean, hurricanes cause damage. You put a hurricane over a city, it's going to cause damage. It doesn't take a god to do that. It doesn't take an agent go, I'm going to make a hurricane and cause it to do damage. And so these are called gratuitous evils or natural evils. It doesn't mean evil like, oh, Satan. No, I mean, it's not like well, I guess over here side, fire and brimstone. No, it just means that it's harmful. So I think there's some equivocation going on here,
Which we took on in the process of evolution. In fact, some of the most respectable atheist philosophers make exactly these claims, such as Michael Ruse, who says, ethics, as we understand it, is an illusion fobbed off on us by our genes to get us to cooperate. Morality, or more strictly, our belief in morality, is merely an adaptation put in place to further our reproductive ends.
Well, I mean, and there's something to be said about that, right? I mean, again, these things don't have any concreteness, right? Or even Mackey had argued from argument from queerness how strange moral propositions actually are comparative to some kind of proposition that relates to reality as far as tangibility, right? If you have an object, if I say apples exist, I can produce an apple. I can show an instantiation that makes that proposition that's truth apt relates to reality. It's called correspondence theory. And so because of that, we understand what it means to be true. Okay, why is the proposition apples exist true? Why? Because there's an apple that's instantiated, that exists, that is called a truth maker, that makes that proposition true. Okay, great. What does it makes morals true? What's being instantiated, right? It's really hard to picture what a moral proposition would be. We understand that they exist, right? We understand that morality in some capacity does exist, but it's kind of like consciousness, right? Abstract thinking. What is morals? The moral non-cognitivist says that, propositions that deal with morality are not propositions. They're non-propositional. Stealing is wrong is a directive, like don't steal, or a motivist would say boo stealing. But a moral objectivist or a moral subjectivist even both agree propositions are truth apt and moral facts exist. Now, what they're dependent upon, they disagree with. So when he's saying that ethics is an illusion, he's basically saying, look, we have to get along with the society. This is just, I'm not going to say it's hyperbolic language, but, like when we say time is illusionary, right? When we say, certain things may not have some kind of concrete existence, that's what they mean by that, right? I think time is illusionary. I don't think something called time really fundamentally may not even exist, right? I don't think that to me, time is basically, a difference between changes in the universe, right? Entropy. As entropy goes up and there's a change in the universe, time moves. If there was no changes in the universe, no entropy, I tend to think that time wouldn't exist. However, that's may or may not be the case, right? It's Platonic realism with respect to time as opposed to nominalism with respect to, it was a Platonic realism versus I guess, is it nominalism with respect to time? I don't remember. But Jimmy Russell, $5. God did it. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know why he's bringing this quote up. I don't understand why he thinks it's really helping his argument, right? I mean, just because of adaptation, which by the way isn't really the appropriate thing to use here, but why we have morals, because adaptation is with respect to the environment, right? Species adapt to an environment. We as individuals don't adapt. Humans don't, individually wise, don't adapt. We acclimate, but it takes a population to adapt. Individuals don't adapt. But again, it's with respect to the environment. So I don't know. To me, I think this is more of a social thing. Is we have adapted to use the word adapted. We have realized that as a society, we have to abide by these things. So that's not really the same use of adaptive in the evolutionary sense. That's why I think there's some equivocation going on.
And so we come full circle. On atheism, evil does not actually exist, other than as a figment of our imagination.
That's not what they're saying. It's not a figment of our imagination. I think evil exists. I know people that are evil. Outright, downright evil. Because what do we mean by these certain words? We mean that they do the wrong things with respect to morality. We think that they harm people. Doesn't mean that there's some concrete being behind that. Doesn't mean there's some satanic being that says, I'm going to create all the evils in the world and hope people, deny God so they can be sent to eternity in hell. I don't believe any of that. And in fact, it's contrary to what I would think a God would be if God exists. But it's not necessary. And so it's not evil as illusionary. We mean evil in the moral sense as a non-believer, and I assume that atheists that do know moral theories would agree on this. We mean evil as doing the wrong thing with respect to some type of ethical theory. Now, there's many types of ethical theory. Matter of fact, like I said, if you look at my moral terminological cheat sheet, it's a lot. It's complicated. It's probably the third most complicated thing that I've read in philosophy, next to theory of mind and theory of perception. Very, very complicated. But he's trying to say, atheists can't have evil because evil to them doesn't exist concretely. So what? Even time may not exist concretely, but we have time, right? It makes no difference. We still understand that I personally think there is evil in the world. Natural evil and actual evil people that do evil things. And I'm okay with that because my moral theory allows for that. And he just seems to shit on my moral theory, right? And I tend to virtue ethics. Virtue ethics are based upon individual characteristics. I think that's a very good way to develop moral theory. There's no right or I hate to say this because it sounds weird, it's meta. There's no right or wrong what moral theory you pick. I don't think there's a way to determine what's the proper moral theory. We're still discovering if there's a proper way to have a specific moral theory that's better than all others. I don't know if there is such a thing. We certainly have not found it. We all have different moral theories we go by. Some of us go by consequentialism. Somebody go by utilitarianism. Somebody go by deontics. Some go by virtue ethics, like I do. Okay, whatever. Pick your poison, right? And I don't think you even have to subscribe to just one. I think you can go to many. You need to appeal to different ones. But I tend to virtue ethics because I very much believe in character, and I think that virtue ethics, which in a nutshell is basically an Aristotelian look at virtue versus vices. So you have a virtue that's in between two vices, right? So think of it as a line. You got two vices, and in the middle you got a virtue. So a virtue is something we strive for all the time. We always want to be virtuous. We want to avoid the vices, which are the extremes. For example, if I say honesty is a virtue, what I mean by that is we want to be honest, but we don't want to be so brutally honest that we hurt people's feelings, right? Do I look fat in these jeans? No, honey, you don't. They look really good on you. Which, by the way, is not really great to tell a woman either, because you want them to get something that is appealing to them and not look bad. So there are ways to cushion, these things. But you don't want to be brutal honest to hurt people's feelings, right? But again, you don't want to be some kind of liar that lies about everything, right? I consider that to be a vice. I consider that to be an evil person. So, when you're looking at these vices versus virtues, it's a way we can look at virtue ethics to say, hey, my moral code is based upon individual characteristics of how to determine to do right versus wrong. Now, does it always work? Probably not. Again, there might be times you want to defer to other things, and I don't have a problem with deferring to consequentialism, which is basically what is moral based upon the results, the consequences of the action, or utilitarianism, which is the overall benefit to everybody else, right? Sometimes you have to appeal to other forms of ethics. Personally, now again, everybody has to formulate their own ethical framework, and this is one of the things that I think that a theist who has been in religion for a very long time doesn't do very well. I don't think they formulate their ethical theory for themselves very well, because a lot of them defer just to God, right? They'll say whatever God says, that's ethical. Well, now you basically hobbled yourself. You basically have deferred to some other agent what is right or wrong. I mean, would that be any different than saying, hey, look, whatever's right or wrong is what Joe Schmuckatelli says. Some cult leader. Not going to compare God to a cult leader, but let's say it for what it is. If I say, hey, if this cult leader says it's good or bad, then that's what's good or bad. That's the same thing what you're saying when you're saying whatever God says is good or bad. You're deferring your normative ethical framework of what you should actually do to somebody else. And so I don't think they develop a very good ethical theory. And so when theists like that leave theism, when they say, look, I no longer believe, or I've somehow after looking at all the evidence said, look, there are no gods, and I think gods now are BS. The problem is they have not developed an ethical theory to move on past that. And so you'll see a lot of atheists out there that have come from these kind of backgrounds where they've been very strong evangelicals or young creationists and had all these huge misconceptions, and they were lied to for so many years. They never developed an ethical framework, and they become unethical atheists. This is something I've witnessed firsthand. People know this. And I think that is a very good explanation for why we see a lot of atheists that are just so unwilling to be ethical people. So that's, again, just my view on that. Take it for what it's worth. But it does lead to me to that conclusion based upon my observations and my own personal history and your guys' history with some of these unethical atheists. And at least makes sense. It's a working theory, at least. Let me know what you guys think about that.
That's why when atheists complain about things like genocide, war crimes, or the problem of evil in general, they're basically complaining about something which, according to them, should be taken as seriously as the flying spaghetti monster. The notion that...
No, that's a complete straw man. First of all, the flying spaghetti monster was basically a caricature to try to show that, look, there's just as much evidence for a flying spaghetti monster as there is God. And again, I'm not going to argue the nuances of that. But it's a caricature, right? But I've never met an atheist that says, hey, moral theory should be comparable to the flying spaghetti monster. Matter of fact, many atheists that are philosophers dive deep into moral theory, right? It is a huge part of philosophy. And he's just saying, oh, well, if they're atheists, they should, treat morality like illusion. Why? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard to try to compare it to the flying spaghetti monster, because, again, it's meant to be something completely different. It had nothing to do with morality. Oh, shit, did I? Back where I was.
And his fellow atheists and his followers apes. Now to natural selection, the
at
most respectable atheist philosophers make should be taken as seriously as the flying spaghetti monster. The notion that this could be considered a rational position by any stretch of the imagination must be, I guess, one of the dogmas atheists simply embrace with blind faith.
again, look, I'm the first person to think that some atheists have blind faith and they're dogmatic. I will. If it was some other topics, I'd be totally on board with this guy, right? But people know I'm not a tribalist. I don't go where the wind blows. I have a very specific direction and course that I believe very strongly, and I articulate and I argue. But his argument on this is crap. I don't know any atheist who does this. This is a straw man. And when people say, straw man, they usually get it wrong. This, to me, is a straw man argument because I've never seen any atheist argue this, ever. And if there is, then I'd like to, meet them. But I don't see people going around saying, oh, morality is just, an illusion and we shouldn't give a damn. We should all go out and do what we want. And maybe there's some that do. Maybe there are. Maybe they're anarchists. I don't know. But it's not a group of people that I associate with, and it's certainly not prevalent in any of the philosophical literature that I've ever read. That's for damn sure.
And by the way, you don't have to take my word for what I just said, because what's telling is that it is atheist philosophers themselves who have admitted that on the assumption that atheism is true, their position on the issues of justice and evil are as inconsistent as anything could be. I mean, pick Bertrand Russell, for example, who, while advocating for human rights, also confessed that what he's doing does not make any sense, given that he is also an atheist. Or Joel Marx, an atheist philosopher.
Real quick on the Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, is not. I mean, he's a contemporary philosopher. He's not, but he's long since passed. But he is in the 20th century. But Bertrand Russell liked to ask a lot of questions. He really got in the nuance of the nitty gritty of these things. And I have read some of Russell's stuff, the meaning of the good and bad. And what he says was, to explain what we mean by good and bad, we may say that a thing is good when on its own account it ought to exist, and bad when on its own accord ought not to exist. And I think that's a very good way of putting it. So what he was saying by that was that we're talking about is ought. We're talking about a description, which is, and how do you get to an ought? And so moral theory, in the way he was trying to describe it, was, what is it we ought to do in a given situation? These are normative ethics, right? So even though we know what it is we can describe the situation. How do we get to the ought? How do we get to the imperative? So I think he's mischaracterizing what Bertrand Russell was saying. I think that, I don't know if you ever read Russell, but Russell asked a lot of these questions. And he was very prolific in a lot of his writings, and he didn't have a lot of answers for things. He was a philosopher that asked a lot of questions, but didn't really directly say these are the answers to these things. Matter of fact, the whole the teapot analogy, he doesn't really draw much inference from it. He's putting it out there, but he doesn't draw much inference other than he's just saying, look, if somebody says this, it's not somebody else's position to disprove it. That's the main takeaway from the teapot argument. But a lot of people think a lot of other things about the teapot argument that they read into, and one of these days I will get a blog on that because I've been meaning to, but haven't yet. But I think he's mischaracterizing Bertrand Russell here. But maybe you guys could weigh in on that. Oh shit! I keep pushing the wrong thing here.
That what he's doing does not make any sense, given that he is also an atheist. Or Joel Marx, an atheist philosopher who says, I have long been laboring under an unexamined assumption, namely that there is such a thing as right and wrong. I now believe there isn't. I became convinced that atheism implies amorality. He goes on to say that believers are correct. Without God, there is no morality. In other words,
now Joel Marx, I believe he did become a theist. He says this. He says, until I experienced my shocking epiphany that the religious fundamentalists are correct, without God there is morality, but they are incorrect. So he's not a theist, but he says, until I experienced my shocking epiphany that the religious fundamentalists are correct, without God there is morality. There is no morality, but they are incorrect. I still believe about there being a God. Hence, I believe there is morality, and it sounds like moral nihilism, which he's fine to have that, but that's not norm. I mean, that's an extreme point of view, right? This is, I hate to say kind of cherry picking, because this is not the normative approach for atheists that I've seen through secular humanism and other approaches. That I don't know many atheists that go around saying, yeah, morality, it can only exist with a God. Very few people I know that. Matter of fact, I think it's bumpkiss, to be honest with you. I mean, I will tell you right now, I think it's completely bogus. You can have morality without a God. I will make that claim, and I will argue that claim, and I will go into the morality, the moral theory behind that. But, Joel Marx, I think he's a professor of psychology, if I'm not mistaken, because he's a hard determinist. And so the way he looks at it is that, we really, if hard determinism is true and metaphysically speaking, it's all materialism or physicalism, then, we don't really have any choice, and therefore it's all just kind of laid out. So if we have morality with a sense of right or wrong, then it has to come from a God. Now, I don't know how he came to that conclusion. I don't, but I fully disagree with it. Now, he is using, this person as a reference, but he's, again, if I'm not mistaken, a psychologist, not a philosopher, if I remember correct. But again, so what? I disagree with Joel on that. I don't know many atheists that go. He's trying to make it sound like all atheists say, "Oh, well, yeah, morality can only exist with a God." I don't see that. Maybe I'm wrong on that. If you're an atheist out there and you think that morality can only exist with God and you become a moral nihilist, okay, let me know if that's your position. But I'm just kind of curious. I don't see it very often, right?
On atheism, talking about right and wrong as well as good and evil is inconsistent nonsense. So as long as you believe that all there is in the universe are atoms and biomolecules, which evolution has miraculously, by the wave of a magic wand, turned into apple trees, raping apes, and Homo sapiens.
You see a lot of the hyperbolic language this guy uses, right? I mean, it's so unnecessary, and it's not even helping his argument, because evolution has nothing to do with atoms to man. That again is not biological theory. Abiogenesis is not included in evolution. I know a lot of people would like it to be, including scientists, and maybe one day it will. I wouldn't mind if it was either. I think that if it would be beautiful to have, an explanation basically of everything, all the way from, how the Big Bang came about, how time came about, how space and matter came about, all the way to, the first living organism, whether it be on our planet or some other planet, to us. I think that'd be wonderful. But we don't have that yet. And these are different theories that explain different things. And this is what I'm saying. I think it's disingenuous when any theist goes out there saying, well, evolution doesn't explain how man came from a rock. Well, first of all, that's not what it says and never would say, nor does abiogenesis say that, because, that's the Hovind argument. These are dishonest approaches. These are straw man arguments. And this would be appropriate use to throw out the fallacy of straw man, because I don't see anybody arguing these things. I don't know any. Well, okay, this is true that I don't know any. There might be some atheist that is so completely inept that he thinks evolution means, here's a rock. Years later, from those rocks came humans. Maybe, I'm sure. I mean, I don't think it's implausible. But I don't associate with those kind of atheists, and I certainly don't see that being promoted, right? I think most atheists would say that's BS.
Then you have no reason to suppose that good and evil actually exist, other than as an illusory figment of our imagination. And why would anyone care about illusions? That would be as rational as getting all worked up about whether the non-existing green unicorn or the non-existing pink dragon is winning the non-happening competition around planet Earth.
That's such a bad analogy.
On the other hand, if you actually want to affirm that evil is not just an illusory problem, but a real one, you have to allow for the existence of something that transcends both nature and humanity. Something which makes the notion of good and evil plausible. A God who created human beings not as another kind of animal fighting for survival, but as creatures with intrinsic value and dignity is a pretty good start and candidate for that. For lots of good reasons that I will not get into in this video now.
Now, and look, I kind of tend to believe that we as humans have intrinsic value. That's open to interpretation. There are people out there saying, no, there's no intrinsic value to life, no intrinsic value to humans. Okay, fine. If you want to think it's extrinsic value or no value, I'm not going to argue that. It's subjective, right? I personally think there is intrinsic value to be had there. And what I mean by that is that the value is found in of itself. The gold has intrinsic value by the virtue it being gold, right? Money, fiat money, like the dollar bill, has no intrinsic value. It's cotton fibers put together with some ink on it. right? It only has value because we've given it value, because either when back in the day we were on the gold standard, or now it's debt money. But there's something about our society in our economic system, or economic system, that gives it value, right? So it's extrinsic value. But I think humans do have an intrinsic value. But again, that's just my own personal view on that. There's no right or wrong to be had on that, and I don't care whether people agree with it or disagree with it. I don't care. I think we have an intrinsic value by virtue of us being sentient beings. There's virtue to be had there.
And so on the assumption of theism, evil can be consistently talked about.
And by the way, for live chat, if you guys spend your time trying to point out every misstatement I say or how I mispronounce things, you're going to be a lot of work. I mispronounce a lot of things. I've always done this. I have a speech impediment that I grew up with. I understand that. I don't need to be reminded of it. I appreciate it, but it just fills up the live chat. It's always been my shtick since I've been in YouTube, because that's just how I talk, and I do mispronounce things. I always have all my life. I'm well aware of it. I don't need to be reminded of it. I appreciate it. Trust me. But I told people I've had a lot of speech therapy over my years in high school and junior high and even elementary school. If you guys heard me in like fourth grade, you would not be able to understand me the way I mispronounce things. I couldn't do R's. I couldn't do S's. I spent a lot of time doing exercises, and anybody who's been in speech therapy knows what I'm talking about. I don't need to be reminded of it. Thank you.
As a real problem. This leaves atheists with the following trilemma. The first option they have is to be philosophically consistent, become moral nihilists, and stop.
And like I said, he pronounced it nihilist, right? I'd say nihilist. Who cares? These are just inflections. And there's a word that linguists use for different dialects that pronounce things differently, and I don't remember what it was. Linguistics is not a field that I look into much, although I find it very fascinating. But there's a guy that comes around who has a PhD in linguist, who's a linguist who probably would know what it is. But again, there's different dialects out there, the different way of pronouncing things. I say nihilism. He says nihilist. Whatever. I don't care how a word is pronounced. To me, it's conveyed differently. But like I said, I have a hard time pronouncing certain things, and I mess them up all the time. There's a technical term for it. It's oh my goodness, proxia. I can't remember what it's called. So you guys know more about that stuff than I do, but something like a proxia or dysproxia. I don't even care. Like I said, that's something I grew up with. But I don't think that most atheists are moral nihilists. Now, again, the term moral nihilist also has equivocation problems, right? Because moral nihilism also means error theory, which is Mackey's view of morals, which is that propositions exist, moral propositions do relate moral truth that can be true or false. However, he believes, because what's called an instantiation error, that there is no property such as stealing is wrong. There is no property called wrongness to make that proposition stealing is wrong, true or false, or true. Therefore, it defaults to false. He calls it error. It's an error. That's why it's called error theory, that all moral propositions do express a moral proposition, but moral propositions are false. Right? And by the way, even non-existent words, that's how things become more in the vernacular. There are words not in the dictionary that people say. Again, I don't need to be reminded of it. I appreciate it, but it just please, I'm asking you, just don't. It just wastes everybody's time. I don't care. I just don't. So, I mean, if there's something that's really bad, let me know. Look, if I get something wrong as far as, hey, I'm saying this and I'm actually prescribing this is the usage in some way, and I misunderstand the concept, then let me know, right? But other than that, it's just waste everybody's time.
Talking about the non-existing problem of evil. This leads to a rather bleak kind of existence, but has at least some integrity to it. Second option, they keep complaining about evil with the painful awareness of their irrationality, as they are complaining about something which, in their worldview, is nothing.
This is a misunderstanding of cognitive dissonance as well. And again, it isn't nothing. Evil is something. It may not have a concrete form. Okay, it doesn't have concreteness, or I think it's called hypostantiation. And if I'm mispronouncing that, whatever. So you can go look it up, right? But it still is something that we do understand does exist in some capacity, right? I mean, if I say, look, I am thinking of this, that concept in my head, even though it doesn't have tangible properties to it, it doesn't exist somewhere externally to my mind, we do for understand in some capacity there's an existence there. We can get into Platonic realism and whether forms exist or universals exist. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that he's arguing that atheists think that morals don't even have any reality, evil doesn't have any reality, therefore there's a cognitive dissonance in their minds and they're in the state of irrationality. That's nonsense. I'm a non-believer. I have no cognitive dissonance whatsoever. I think it's perfectly rational to think evil exists. Doesn't mean that evil comes from some metaphysical being. When I use the term evil, I'm talking about the way Bertrand Russell was trying to explain it is ought. What we ought to do, normative ethical theory. What is it that we should do that is the proper course of action that is good? Now, again, very difficult to determine that. Right? Moral theory is difficult, and we all have to find our own way to know what is right and wrong. But it doesn't give me any cognitive dissonance, and I don't think it gives any atheist cognitive dissonance for them to say, yeah, evils exist. Hurricanes, yeah, they're evil. So what? It's natural evil. Or this person has done an evil thing. There are evil people in the world. I think Trump's evil, right? I think he's an evil man. I think he has done evil things. I think he's a lying, manipulative sociopath. I think he has no understanding of compassion, no understanding of empathy. Okay, so what? I'm allowed to say this. Well, how do you know? There's no absolutism. I'm not an absolutist. I'm not a moral absolutist. I tend to, if anything, moral universalism maybe, but I'm also a moral objectivist. But that doesn't mean that everything has to fall into this moral absolute, right? Again, people love throwing these terms together. That's why I wrote the moral terminological cheat sheet, which is in the video description. Pass it around. Let me know what you think of it, because I don't think I'm going to get to it in this particular episode. I'll do another stream on it later. But moral objectivism doesn't mean that everything has to be right or wrong. Moral objectivism means just basically, hey, there is a moral proposition that is a moral fact that represents something about a moral state that is objectively discoverable, that we can go out and find for ourselves. We don't need to rely on anybody else. We don't need their subjective opinion on it. Just like I can discover that 1 + 1 = 2, I can figure that out, even though I can know that a priori. But I can figure it out. I don't need anybody else to go run 1 rock plus another rock, 2 rock. Okay, I get that. I guess conceptually, I might call them different things, obviously, but conceptually, I understand that. Objective morality is something that we can go learn on our own. We don't need somebody else to tell us what the moral right or wrong action is. I can learn on my own, and we can as a society. Stealing bread from each other is bad, right? And if we're grounding that on harms and benefits, even though that is what's called a hypothetical imperative rather than a categorical imperative, meaning it's goal-oriented, we can still say, look, that's bad, right? That's bad. Stealing is objectively bad as a whole. Now, it doesn't mean that there are not times we should not steal, or I shouldn't say there are times that stealing wouldn't be justified, right? That would be moral absolutism is saying, no, never steal, right? I'm not saying that. It's not the same thing as moral objectivism. There's also moral pluralism, which says, maybe it is wrong to steal always, but if you're starving, and you have to survive, you got to do what you got to do. What is the lesser of the evils kind of thing, right? And so, just because there's multiple bad actions, and you have to take the lesser of the evil, that's then the right action to take, right? That doesn't negate the other actions are bad. It doesn't mean that it makes stealing good. It means that no, stealing is still wrong, but there's a higher value to be had, higher virtue to be had, which is survival, right? And I do think moral pluralism has a lot of good points in that way, right? But again, moral theory is messy. But I don't think he's ever read a single thing about moral theory whatsoever.
But an illusion. And the third option, atheists may admit that evil is actually real, while also admitting that they have to ditch their atheism to make this claim in the first place.
Why? I'm not an atheist. I'm not a theist. And I say evil exists. I don't need a God for that. I firmly believe you do not need a God for that. Matter of fact, I think it makes it more complicated if there is a God, right? I think it makes it much more difficult. And by the way, he doesn't really get into the problem of evil much here. I mean, I don't think he really even. I don't know where he gets the title "Evil Disproves Atheism" because it does. He hasn't made that argument. But why would an atheist have to ditch atheism to recognize that evil exists? You just say, look, evil exists, but it's not contingent upon a God. As a matter of fact, again, I do believe that divine command theory falls under ethical subjectivism. Now, there are arguments to be made that it could fall under a moral, what's called ethical objectivism schema. Okay, I've read some of those. I don't think they really hold water, but I'm not going to sit there and argue against them. But there are very specific types of divine command theory. But in general, the way most theists describe divine command theory, it would, to me, fall under ethical subjectivism because I have no way to independently, objectively discover these things. I have to rely on somebody else's perception of it in their mind and rely on that. And now some people argue, well, that's objective because, you can go ask the agent that came up with it. You can go ask God. Well, no, I don't think that qualifies as objective. I mean, because how do I know that God is telling me that truth? He has to impart to me that he's not just all knowledgeable and all powerful and he's all good, but I cannot be wrong about that, right? I mean, I'd have to be the same level of that deity to me even argue kind of moral objectivity there. So I think very strongly that if God exists, it is ethical subjectivism, which is fine. I'm not arguing against ethical subjectivism. There is ethical subjectivism, but I think that it's a combination of subjectivism and objectivism. I think there's both. It only takes for me one moral proposition that's objective for objective morality to exist. So I don't care. I think that both of them have value. But if God exists, it makes it so much more difficult because now you don't have the ability to go out and go, oh, what is morally the good here? Oh, well, okay, well, whatever God says. Well, now you've deferred your moral framework to some other being. Right?
Place. This, of course, is scary, considering the dogmatic fervor with which atheists try to defend their position. In a nutshell, what all of this means is exactly what I said at the beginning. Atheists who talk about the problem of evil are, according to them, engaging in self-delusional gibberish about what doesn't exist in the first place.
Well, again, I'm not going to get an atheist on that believes moral theory, that understands moral theory, that probably is a moral objectivist. Most atheist philosophers are moral objectivists. They recognize evil exists, and they don't believe in God, and they will probably argue God is not necessary, right? I mean, theists argue God's necessary for morals, but they'll argue that an atheist doesn't have to recognize it, right? They'll say, look, morality exists because God exists. However, an atheist just maybe borrows from their worldview or whatever. They don't have to recognize it to be moral. At least that's most of the theists I deal with. People know that I work very closely with Reasons to Believe, Dr. Hugh Ross and Dr. Rana, and our producer Anastasia. I carry on conversations with them frequently. They hold that kind of view, right? That yes, you do need God for morality, but the atheist doesn't have to recognize that, right? Now, to me, it's kind of a cop-out, if I really had to say, because, well, if as a non-believer, I don't recognize it, then I don't really need it. I don't think that you need God for morality. I think what you need is society. You need a self-aware society that has to get along with each other. That's the necessary and sufficient condition for wanting morality, right? And by the way, most atheists that I know that are experts in these topics are objective followers of objective morality. They are moral objectivists. Matter of fact, many atheists that are not even professionals that I know that are into philosophy, that are not lay, these lack theists, they agree about objective morality. So, atheists who think that because there's no God, you have just subjective morality, are completely wrong on that. And they conflate moral objectivism with moral absolutism all the time. It drives me and Dave Trolley, Dave Manson's and Reason. It drives us freaking crazy, and Joe from Manson's and Reason drives us nuts because we understand the distinction there. And when atheist says, "Oh, all morals are subjective," and you ask them to their reasoning for that, they never have any, and they start conflating it with moral absolutism. And I'm not a moral absolutist. If I do think there's some value for what's called moral universalism, which there might be some moral principles that are universal, but they're not absolute. And there's a distinction to be made there. So
In contrast, any atheist who wants to actually engage in rational and coherent talk about real evil cannot do so unless he or she assumes that God exists.
That's nonsense.
So, is evil evidence that God doesn't exist, as atheists so often claim? Far from it. If anything, by bringing up the problem of evil, atheists actually end up deflating their own atheism all by themselves.
How does that even follow? I mean, the problem of evil has been around for a very long time. Granted, I think the logical problem of evil is very specific in scope. I think it's very, very powerful, but narrow. And so if that disproves this particular God, that's fine. I mean, to me, it is incoherent. The system is incoherent. And I agree with the logical problem of evil. I think it's a very, very excellent argument. Probably one of the strongest arguments out there because it is logically based. It's valid and sound, and it shows that the system is inconsistent, which means that all the propositions can be at the same time. But it's so specific. It's so narrow to a very specific kind of God. But the evidential is much wider. It's a much wider argument, so it has less impact. It's less powerful. But he has not shown anything to show why the logical problem of evil disproves God does not exist. I mean, he doesn't even talk about theodicies, which is weird, because that's usually how they go about justifying, why evil exists, like soul building, like God sent us here to learn and build our soul. His name is John Hicks' view, or Plantinga, it's kind of same kind of position. He talks about some types of theodicies that he has, but he doesn't go into any of that. So yeah, I think it's very odd. I don't know where he thinks this is even close to a rational argument against atheism. And again, I will bitch at atheists all day long. I don't really go into whether God exists or God does not exist. That's not my shtick. I don't have a dog in that fight. I am apatheistic when it comes to that. Not that I don't care whether God exists or not. It's just I don't want to sit there and argue with a theist, God doesn't exist, or argue with an atheist, God does exist. I don't care. Those arguments bore me. They go nowhere, right? There's nothing going to be resolved from that. Right, I go by what can be objectively looked at and factually based. Right, when somebody says, "Hey, look, in philosophy, this is held as this," and that's not the case, I can objectively go look and tell you, "Hey, look, that's not how it actually is." Right? If somebody says all atheists are moral subjectivists, and I go, "Well, no, that's not true." I mean, most atheists that I know that understand moral theory very well tend to be moral objectivists. I can show that to be the case. There's a fact of the matter to be had there. I don't know what the fact of the matter is to be had if God exists or not, because there's nothing I can look at. And that's why I do tend to agnosticism, is that there's nothing there to even for me to really look at besides the arguments and my personal experience, right? And I've had personal experience that I cannot explain, and I cannot transport that to somebody else. It's non-transportable. I call it non-transportable justification, because my reasons are not your reasons, and they can never be your reasons, right? Because they are objective reasons. I fully admit that they are epistemically off limits to you, and I get that. So I don't get into those discussions. And I don't care. If somebody says, "Well, why you're agnostic?" I'll tell them my reasons and move on. Right? I'm not wanting to be swayed either way. I don't want a theist to convince me that God exists. I don't want an atheist to convince me God does not exist. Never. What I want is to tell you guys why some of these I feel these arguments are good or why they're bad, and I do that frequently, and I'll continue to do that, and I enjoy it. And it's not just the atheist to have bad arguments. Here's a theist that has a really bad argument.
So thank you. I'm happy to take that. I guess the fact that atheists who are supposedly all about...
Russell says, see Peckman's theosophy of love. Is that the electron in love, Russell? Are you talking about electrons in love? That's an atheist argument about electrons in love. And I don't think that's the same thing you're talking about, because I don't recognize a theodicy of love. But there is something called electrons in love, where somebody has argued that moral theory could have came about completely naturally, even among electrons. So it sounds weird, and I don't fully understand the argument, but he does try to show a moral framework with complete materialism and electrons falling in love and wanting to be good together and separate.
Evidence end up arguing the case for God when bringing up their biggest objection against him may itself be taken as good evidence for the rationality of belief in God. Have a good one, and see you in the next episode.
Yeah, there's nothing that he said that would ever, to me, go, oh yeah, that makes sense, that now I'm more likely to believe God exists. Nothing. Absolutely nothing in his argumentation. It was fallacious. It had misunderstandings of evolutionary theory and biology, had misconceptions of moral theory. If you're going to convince somebody that of some position, you have to avoid fallacies. You cannot argue fallaciously. This is what I see all the time on Facebook, and I see all the time on Twitter. Atheists are the worst at it. And of course, theists do it too. I've always said this, but I think personally, and maybe I just, from the groups that I'm in, I see atheists using fallacy after fallacy after fallacy after fallacy, and then you call them out on it, and they think, oh, you're a theist. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not a theist. I'm just saying that your argumentation is bad because you are using a fallacy. And worse is they throw out a fallacy and they get the fallacy wrong. How many times have you guys seen that? When an atheist throws out a fallacy and they just butcher it to no end. Ad populum, they get wrong. Argument from authority, they get wrong. Not ad hominem, they get wrong. They get all these fallacies wrong. And this is, one of the things I do think rationality tends to do is he loves to argue by fallacy. This is the fallacy, this is the fallacy, this is the fallacy, when a lot of times it probably isn't. You should only really throw out a fallacy when there's a clear-cut case of fallacious argumentation where you can point out what the argument is, what the actual argument being told is, right? Steelman them. Show the format for the fallacy. So, okay, this are the conditions for the fallacy, and this is how you met it. Because a lot of them don't do that. It's not the fallacy, actually. The fallacy, Helios, is saying that the conclusion of an argument is fallacious merely because there's a fallacy in the argument itself, right? If there's an informal fallacy in the argument, but the conclusion is true, and you say the conclusion is false because there's a fallacy, that's the fallacy. There's also fallacy, and it goes on, whatever. But yeah, just because there's a fallacy in the argument doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion is false. And it may still be a weak argument, right? You can say, yeah, there's a fallacy we have there, but there is points to be still made, and try to make the argument a little bit better and try to avoid that fallacy, right? Because the conclusion still could be true. All right. But anyways, we're going to wrap this up. I am keeping this under 90 minutes. We're at the 76-minute mark. Thanks to the intrigued feline being my timer there. I don't even need to look at my clock. I have a mod that has taken on the responsibilities of being the time agent. So thank you for that. But we do have about 13 minutes, I guess, at most. I'll do the higher math in my head. I'm not even using a calculator. But if you want to ask some questions now, please do it. I will show you real quick my moral theological cheat sheet. Again, I'm not going to go over it, but just give you a preview of what I will do next time or future. Okay, so this is, as you guys know, my blog, 3M Philosophy, I call it. I wrote this about a week ago, and these are all the different. I'm gonna have to make these bold. I'm gonna make these like bold so they stand out more. But I kind of give them a very brief overview of how I look at these positions. I take them from various sources. I kind of just condense the understanding of it to a very distilled. This is what this position tends to refer to if you read in the literature. And again, I got things wrong or right. I don't know. But this is how I view these positions basically. But there's a lot. There's a lot of positions to go over, right? So again, I'm probably not obviously going to do that this video because 12 minutes. But in the future I will. But if you want to check it out, it is in the video description. I am going to go back and edit. I think I'm going to make names bold so they're easy to read. Have you guys read it yet? How many of you guys have read my moral terminological cheat sheet? No. And how many of you guys read my last entry on my definitions? Because I actually put that in a PDF. At the very bottom, I have a PDF because it involves math. And I know that when I do math in the blog, it's linear, right? It's inline notation. And inline notation is a very difficult way to conceptualize math as opposed to LaTeX or in a PDF where you can actually write it out using the more proper symbology. And I have corrected my index. Thank you. Not only did I screw up the index and I used 0 to infinity rather than 1 to infinity, which I did that. I also got the index wrong. I put I instead of N. And people call that out. And see, that's the call outs I want. Say, hey, Steve, you got your index wrong. You started your index with the wrong number. You used the wrong variable. That's That's what I want to be corrected on, because that's objective, right? So I love to be corrected, that kind of stuff. I appreciate it immensely. I really do, because I had Dr. Pi go, I think you mean N here. I'm like, yeah. And by the way, I didn't sit there and go, you're wrong. I said, looked at it. Yeah, yep. You're right. And so I want those things fixed. I want my blog and my information that I put out to be as correct as possible. And if you find an incorrect statement and you find something that you can definitely say, look, this math is wrong here. Math is objective. I love that. I will thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I don't want to put out bad math, right? Did anybody read it? Nobody's saying they read it. Oh, I'm just kind of hurt here, but that's okay. I know Intrigued Feline, you read it because you helped me correct some of this stuff. Not in this blog, but my by definition blog, because atheists, for a lot of atheists, I want to characterize some atheist, which I call New Atheist TM, which, by the way, is not my thing. I didn't come up with New Atheist TM. That was from Reddit. I just borrowed it. Those New Atheist TM, they don't understand the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. They think that a dictionary prescribes use. Oh, it's funny, Helios. You say that, I even said, look, if I said something mathematically correct, like sine 0 equals 1, I'm going to have a bunch of mathematicians just inundating with me going, you messed up there, Steve. And I just said it as a joke. I mean, I literally just said, if I say this will happen. And people corrected that. And they're like, oh, I get your point. They didn't understand that I was using it as a way to show that, look, if I do say something incorrect mathematically, it's objective, I will be corrected. And that's why I love this the fact that math is objective. And I love that I want information out there to be right. And so that kind of stuff, that's what I promote on this channel. Objectivity. And the fact that you can go look for yourself. You don't need me to tell you, math. You can go learn it yourself. I just, want to help people that are struggling with the basic concepts. Because I only had basic calculus. But, I know enough calculus for Calc Level 2 to understand, Taylor series, that nature, that I hopefully can explain it sufficiently. Now, I did a video not too long ago on propositions and propositional logic, and I didn't do a great job, and I admit that. I got some things messed up, and that's fine. But you know what? I corrected in real time. And that's what matters, is that as long as you recognize that you're making a mistake and you have people that are knowledgeable to correct you, you're always going to have the most accurate information available. And that's what this channel thrives on. And I have you guys that are always correcting me on these things. I have intelligent people that are well-informed, well-knowledgeable about these topics, moral theory included. So when I talk about moral theory, I know there's people out there that have studied moral theory, that if they say, Steve, I think you meant this term, other than this term, I'll say, yep, I got that wrong. Or worse is when I say, hey, this term is understood as this, and they say, no, it's not. Look at the literature, and I go, yeah, that term isn't understood like that. Josiah's read it. Hey, Josiah. So, yay. YouTube, I know YouTube General has read some stuff. All right. Well, anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. I am fast coming upon the 90-minute mark, aren't I? Where am I at here? I get this right on 90 minutes. 83. I got 7 more minutes of fill time. All right, I'm gonna try to extend it 7 minutes. I don't know what else to talk about. Oh, I'm not gonna get into quantum mechanics, man. In fact, what's funny though? I find it weird that in quantum mechanics, we do understand that if two particles are entangled and they go off in 180 degrees different directions, if one is spin up, we measure one spin up, the other one has to be spin down with 100% certainty. And people ask, what do you consider to be certain? It's like, well, within the framework of that system, we know that it has to be certain. Well, how do you know that evil genius isn't, putting your brain in a vat, or some evil demon isn't showing you that it's spin up, spin down? Sure, whatever. We can get into the brain of vat arguments, but in the system, right? In the system of quantum mechanics, we have certainty. It does exist. Not required for knowledge, But if you have certainty, you have knowledge. If you have knowledge, you have belief. So certainty implies knowledge. Knowledge implies belief. There's a nice correlation there that I think is a very simple model. And so when people say, well, there's nothing we can be certain about, well, bullshit. I am certain if we measure the particle bent up, the other one could be bent down. Well, how do you know that? Because it's quantum mechanics, and that's how it works. I claim certainty. Well, what happens if you're wrong? Then my claim to certainty was incorrect, right? That's all. Okay. And by the way, you're probably win a Nobel Prize if you could disprove quantum mechanics. Okay, so anyways, I am going to try to wrap this up. If you guys have a video you want me to review, please send it to me. Shorter is preferred. This was 10 minutes, and it already took 90 minutes of my time. So you can imagine if you send me a 2-hour video, what's going to happen. I don't really have the patience to do that. A clip from it is fine. If you say, hey, look, I got this clip, or at least, review of this portion, maybe. Yeah, Boltzmann brains don't tend to last very long, Don Giovanni. I mean, if the universe was a Boltzmann brain, from what I understand, it would come into existence and disappear within microseconds. From what I understand about a Boltzmann brain. But hey, look, I think I passed the Turing test at least. I'm a sentient being. Now, if you guys want to disbelieve that, that's fine. Just remember this. This is a fun fact. If solipsism is true, there can be only one, and I'm it. Fun fact. So there can only be one true solipsist. I don't know what you guys are arguing about the whole point. I'm really paying attention. This right here is there. That's it. Simple as that. Mathematical relationship. There's no difference. Same value. Same as saying this. There's no difference between that. 1/2 and 0.5 are the same number expressed differently. 0.9 I'm repeating, and 1 the same number expressed differently. There's no difference in between. Now, so if there's no numbers in between two numbers of the same number. For every real number, you can put x plus y divided by 2. And if x and y have no value between them, x and y divided by 2, then x and y must be equal. The transitivity property, right? So either x is less than y, y is greater than y, or y is equal. Which means trichotomy property, not the transitivity property. It's trichotomy property. Trichotomy means 3, so either x is less than y, y is greater than y, or x is equal to y. If there's no difference in between the number between x and y, they have to be equal. Well, so 0.99 repeating and 1, x and y, they're divided by 2. There's no number that exists between them. They are the same number. It's very simple. There's no rounding whatsoever. Just like 1/2 and 0.5, there's no number in between them. There's no rounding. They're the same number. One's expressed in fractional, one's expressed in decimal. 0.9 repeating is called an infinite decimal expansion. One is a terminal decimal. They are the same exact number, just represented differently. It's like looking. The best way I can explain it is, you're looking at a cow. Okay, well, there's a cow, and then somebody might call it a different. Well, I don't know how to say cow in any other language. I'll say cat because I know gato in Spanish. So you're looking at a cat. I call it a cat. You call it a gato. Still a cat. It's the same thing, right? But I'm calling it something else. I can draw, a Siamese cat. They can draw a tabby cat or something. Right? But it's still a cat, right? The same thing. 0.99 repeating is just a different symbol that represents 1. 1 is a terminating symbol that represents 1. 1.0 is a symbol to the 10th decimal place that represents 1. 1.00 represents 1. All those things, 0.9 repeating, 1, 1.0, 1.0, 1.0000, all those things represent 1. They're the same number, just a different visual representation called a numeral. Numerals are representations to what we understand to be where the position is on the roll. Hey, there's your math course for the night. So hopefully, people go watch my videos on all that. If you want to watch my math videos, I have a playlist of math videos. So anyways, let's wrap this up. Like the video if you can. I would appreciate it. We got 35 people watching. About 5 of you actually enjoy this. The rest of the people don't care. I don't know why they watch, but hey, they still watch. Good to go. But for those of you who do watch and care, hopefully my mods at least, like the video, share it, put it up on your social media. I really appreciate when people share this stuff, and hopefully people get something out of it. I do enjoy doing these reviews. I think they're informative, and I think they show that definitely not biased against atheist. Matter of fact, I tend toward atheism because I'm no longer a theist and I am a non-believer. So to me, I think there are good arguments to be had for atheism. And when an atheist tells me there are no arguments for atheism because it's merely a lack of belief, I'm like, oh, damn, that's just stupid stuff. Because the atheists I know say, no, there are very good atheist arguments out there. And I think that because of those atheist arguments, the proposition that God exists is less likely than the proposition God does exist. And I feel that I am justified to say that there are no gods. Right? And by the way, I've been talking to certain people who says, they want me to help them justify that statement. Perfectly fine. Perfectly, go read some Oppie. He says that because of theoretical virtues, of atheist is justified to believe there are no gods if they appeal to this type of argument, right? And I think he makes some very good points. But anyways, we have the 9-minute mark, so I'm going to wrap this up. Please like and subscribe and all that other horse shit. And I'll be seeing you next week. We are going to do a stream on the 24th on Creepshow Art of all that stuff going on. A lot of stuff going on. So Jessica and I are going to be doing that on the 24th and the 25th. We got the hearing. Civil contempt hearing for Kyle, and hopefully I'll be able to stream on that and give you guys more information on that. And I'm going to wrap this up right now because we just hit 91, and good night! Oh, don't forget to become a member too. I appreciate it. Peace.